Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We continue on with the Kitab al-Jihaad was Sair, and on to the next chapter. The one who kills his enemy has the right to take his belongings. From Abu Qatada he says that we were fighting in the Battle of Hunayn and the Muslims turned back in fear. He says, I saw a man from the Mushrikeen overpowering one of the Muslims, so I turned around and attacked him from behind, between his neck and shoulders. He turned around and grappled with me, and I saw death in his face, until death overcame him, and he let me go. He says, I joined Umar, who was saying, what happened to the Muslims? And I said, this is the decree of Allah. He says, then the Muslims returned back, and victory was granted to the Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ, after the victory, said, Man qatala qatilan lahu alayhi bayyina falahu salabuh. Whoever killed a particular enemy and can prove it will obtain his belongings. So to this, Abu Qatada, that killed one of the enemies, said, who will witness for me? And this happened on a few occasions. And one person stood up and he said that Abu Qatada has spoken the truth, but the belongings of the person whom Abu Qatada killed are with me. So, O Messenger of Allah, persuade Abu Qatada to forego his right, so that I can keep his belongings. And Abu Bakr objected. He said, no, one of the lions of Allah who fights in the cause of Allah will not be deprived of what is his. And the Prophet agreed with Abu Bakr, and he told the man to give the belongings, the salab, to Abu Qatada. Abu Qatada says that I sold the armor which the man was wearing, and I bought a garden in the street of Banu Salama. He says this was the first property I acquired after embracing Islam. So the main lesson from the hadith, whoever kills a person, then he will have his belongings as long as he can prove that he is the one who killed that particular person. That's fair enough to understand, but the real question is this a shara'i ruling, which would then apply in all times and places? Or is it, what is a tanzim, a decision given to organize a matter? So in that case, it does not apply during all times and places, rather it is left down to the ijtihad of the ruler. So that is to say, if the ruler does not give this particular rule, then if you kill somebody, then his belongings, his armor, weapons and so on, will go towards the ghanima. So these are two opinions of the scholars, and each one appears to be about as equally as likely. We can take from the narration that you can use wealth to encourage people to do goodness. Because here the Prophet is saying whoever kills a person will have his belongings. This will encourage the Muslims to kill the enemy, and that is a good action. So there is nothing wrong with giving a material incentive to work righteousness, as long as it will not destroy somebody's ikhlas. Ikhlas meaning when you work for the sake of Allah Jalla wa Ala, because it will please Him. So there's nothing wrong with giving people a materialistic encouragement to do goodness. What is not allowed is that you demand from your own self some materialistic wealth, like money, in order to do righteous action. The demand must not come from yourself. So for example, the ruler says that the one who leads the salah or gives the adhan or teaches the Quran and fiqh and so on will receive some money from the Baytul Mal, then this is no problem. You're allowed to accept it, and it is halal. What is wrong is you should make the demand that I will give the adhan only if you pay me such and such an amount, as if this was an ijara contract. So for example, I will build a house for you, or I will paint or decorate your house, but I'm going to charge you this much. That is allowed for painting and decorating and plumbing and so on. These are not acts of ibadah in and of themselves. But for acts of ibadah, you should not be making a demand of this sort. But you are allowed to take whatever is given. Note here, we are talking about pure acts of ibadah, like the salah or the adhan. We are not talking about services, such as, for example, cleaning a masjid. That is not an act of ibadah in and of itself, it's a service, and you are allowed to charge as if it was an ijara contract, because it is an ijara contract, a hiring contract. Also in the chapter, Abdurrahman bin Auf says that two boys came to him at the Battle of Badr. One of them said, Uncle, do you recognize Abu Jahl? And I said, yes. What do you want to do with him? And one of the boys said that I have been told that he abuses Allah's messenger. By Allah, in whose hand is my life, if I see him, I will grapple with him and not leave him until one of us, who is destined to die earlier, is killed. And soon Abdurrahman saw Abu Jahl and indicated to the boys that there he is. Both of them made a rush to him and killed him, each of the boys claiming that they are the ones who killed him. The Prophet asked each of the boys, "Have you wiped your swords?" They said no, so the Prophet examined their swords and saw the blood and said, "Both of you killed him." And then the Prophet decided that the salab, or the belongings of Abu Jahl, be handed over to Mu'adh ibn Amr ibn al-Jamuh. He was one of the two boys, and the other boy was by the name of Mu'adh ibn Afra. From this narration we take notice of the eloquence that this young man is speaking with. He said, "لا يفارق سوادي سواده حتى يموت الأعجل منا." My sawad, meaning my person, will not leave his person, meaning Abu Jahl's person, until the one who is destined to die earlier dies. That is to say, either I kill him or he kills me. And Abdurrahman ibn Auf said to this, "I wondered at this statement, because it was an eloquent statement." We take the ghairah, or the protective jealousy that these boys had to the Prophet, because the reason why they wanted to kill him is simply because Abu Jahl insults the Prophet. And on this ruling, such a person is to be killed even if he repents, because we have to protect the rights of the Prophet. Only if he does repent, he's treated like a Muslim, so the Salat al-Janazah is to be prayed and the Muslims inherit from him. And this is the weightier of the opinions, because some ulama said that his tawbah is not to be accepted and he would be killed as a kafir, but this is not correct. There is no sin for which tawbah is not accepted. But we do not say the same about the mushrikeen. If you have a mushrik who is insulting the Prophet and then he embraces Islam, he is not to be punished. The death penalty which we give is only for the Muslim. One might ask here, is there not a contradiction? Because the Prophet gave the salab, the belongings of Abu Jahl, to Mu'adh ibn Amr ibn al-Jamuh and not to Mu'adh ibn Afra. So that means Ibn al-Jamuh is the one who killed Abu Jahl. Yet the Prophet says, "Both of you killed him." So is this a contradiction? Well, the answer is Mu'adh ibn al-Jamuh is the one who actually laid the killer blow on Abu Jahl. But Mu'adh ibn Afra also contributed and injured Abu Jahl. So to soothe Mu'adh ibn Afra, the Prophet said, "Both of you killed him." But in reality, only one of them laid the fatal blow, and he is the one who receives the salab. And we can also say that the Prophet says, "Both of you killed him," in terms of the reward of killing him. Both of you will have it equally in the akhirah. But as for this world, then the salab can only go to one person. And this is also another example of where you're allowed to judge using qara'in, or indications, because the Prophet looked at the swords of each of them. It is not hardcore proof, but it is an indication, similar to how the man from the advisors of the king judged if Yusuf's shirt is ripped from the front, and Yusuf is lying and she's telling the truth, but if it is ripped from behind, then she is lying and he is telling the truth. Again, this is a qarina. And we also took the narration of Sulaiman alayhi salam cutting the baby in half, and the real mother says, "No, the child belongs to the other woman." Again, this is a qarina. So with the case of Yusuf and Sulaiman and this case of Mu'adh ibn al-Jamuh, we have examples of where you can use qarina, or indications, to give a judgment. As for a bayyina, which is translated a proof, then this would mean witnesses. So for example, a case of a qarina would be something like, if an ironmonger is holding a saw in his hand and a carpenter is claiming that the saw belongs to him, the asl is that the one who's holding the item belongs to him. However, here we have a strong qarina that this is not the case, because an ironmonger does not need to use a saw. You cannot cut an iron using a saw. That is not how it normally works. But whereas with a carpenter, you can cut wood using a saw. That's how it normally works. So here we have a qarina, an indication that the saw belongs to the carpenter, even if it is in the hand of the ironmonger. Another narration of a salab situation, let's just briefly summarize the other narration. About Salama ibn al-Aqwa, he says, at the battle of Hawazin, we were eating in the morning. He says, a man came and sat with us and looked around left and right and suddenly hurried off. Another man from the companions followed him because he thought he was a spy. Salama said, I hurried on foot, caught up with this suspected spy, and made the camel kneel down and struck this suspected spy on the head and killed him. The Prophet asked, who killed this man? And Salama said, "It was I." And the Prophet gave the salab of this man to Salama ibn al-Aqwa'. So we have in this chapter Abu Qatada receiving the salab, Mu'adh ibn Amr ibn al-Jamuh receiving the salab, and Salama ibn al-Aqwa' receiving the salab. Let us take the next chapter about giving additional rewards and ransoming the Muslim prisoner. From Salama ibn al-Aqwa', he says, "We fought against the Fazara and Abu Bakr was the commander. He had been appointed by the Prophet. He says that some enemies were killed and others were taken as prisoners. He says he saw some women and children escaping, so he shot an arrow to make them stop. And amongst them was a woman from Bani Farasa, and she had a daughter with her, who was the prettiest girl in Arabia," he says. He says, "Abu Bakr gave this girl to me as a prize. And when he went back to Al-Madinah, the Prophet demanded that the girl be given to him. And Salama did not want to give this girl to him, but the Prophet insisted. And so in the end, Salama gave the girl to the Prophet, and the Prophet gave this girl back to the Mushrikeen as a ransom for a number of Muslim prisoners who had been kept in Mecca." So we take from this narration that the one who is of a higher status, such as the Prophet here, is allowed to ask the one of a lower status, such as Salama ibn al-Aqwa', if it is for a genuine benefit. And we take the obvious lesson that you're allowed to ransom kuffar prisoners for Muslim prisoners. Let's take the next chapter of the fate. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, "أيما قرية أتيتموها وأقمتم فيها فسهمكم فيها وأيما قرية عصت الله ورسوله فإن خمسه لله ولرسوله ثم هي لكم." If you have come to a town and you set up residence there, then your share is in that town. But if any town disobeys Allah and the Messenger, then a fifth of the ghanima is for Allah and the Messenger, and then afterwards it is for you, meaning the fighters. Also a narration from Umar ibn al-Khattab, he says, "The properties abandoned by Banu Nadir were the ones which Allah bestowed upon the Messenger, for which there was no fight, neither with caravans nor camels. This property was meant for the Prophet. He would use it for the annual expenditure for his family, and would spend the remains for purchasing horses and weapons for fighting." From the first narration, the first part talks about the fay, which is when the enemy leaves its belongings and flees. فَسَحْمُكُمْ فِيهَا, and your share is in that town. So this wealth goes to all of the Muslim population who is in that town. But as for the town which disobeys Allah and the Messenger, so these are the people who are going to fight you, and you're going to fight them back, and you're going to vanquish them, then this wealth now is called a ghanima, a war booty. It's not the fay anymore. So this war booty, the Prophet is saying, a fifth of it goes to Allah and the Messenger, and then the rest of it goes to the fighters. And the rest of it then does not go to the rest of the Muslim population generally. No, rather it goes to the fighters because they have earned it. They have to fight for it. As for if you did not have to fight for it, which is the fay, then it does not go to specifically the fighters. Rather, it goes to the rest of the population generally. So it's a general welfare. Let's take a look at this next chapter about how the prophets are not to be inherited from. From Aisha, who says, "When the Prophet passed away, the wives of the Prophet sent Uthman ibn Affan to Abu Bakr to demand from him their share of the legacy of the Prophet, meaning the wealth that the Prophet left behind. To which Aisha said to them, Has not the Prophet said before, La nurathu ma tarakna fahuwa sadaqah. We are not to be inherited from whatever we leave behind of materialistic wealth, then it is a sadaqah, meaning a sadaqah, general charity to be given to the people. So when we talk about inheritance, we're talking about materialistic wealth. Otherwise, the prophets are inherited from with regards to their knowledge that they leave behind. That's why the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. Al-ulama warathatul anbiya, as the Prophet ﷺ said. Similarly in Surah Maryam, Zakaria ﷺ said, فَهَبْ لِي مِن لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا يَرِثُنِي وَيَرِثُ مِنْ آلِ يَعْقُوبَ. He will inherit me and will inherit from the family of Ya'qub. Inherit what exactly? Knowledge. That is what the prophets leave behind, the knowledge of their particular sharia. The Rafidah, they abuse Abu Bakr and Umar because they did not allow the family of the Prophet to inherit from him. Because of this hadith, the wealth of the prophets are not to be inherited, and they twist the hadith completely. They say that the charity which the prophets leave behind is not to be inherited. But if that were the case, then the prophets would be no different to anyone else. If a normal person dies and he leaves behind charity, so this is a wasiyah that he's leaving behind, this is not to be inherited, we know that. There's no difference. So you see there would be no difference between prophets and non-prophets in that case. Also, we can take the knowledge of Aisha which the other wives did not have, because she is the one who narrated this hadith to them. One asks the question, why do the prophets not inherit? Could there be a reason behind this? And one reason at least is that if the families of the prophets inherited, and supposing they inherited a large share, then you can see what aspersions will be cast on the prophets. That these prophets just want this position of power so they can attain mass wealth to benefit their own personal families. These are the types of aspersions and slurs which will be cast on the character of the prophets. And so this is why the prophets are not inherited from, so as to close off any doors or avenues or routes leading to the reputation of the prophets to be tarnished. Because if you can tarnish or discredit a person, then automatically his following will decrease. Who wants to follow a discredited person? Also in the chapter we have a longer narration which talks about the wives of the Prophet demanding some share of land in Al-Madinah and in a place called Fadak. And Abu Bakr, the Khalifa at that time, refused to give this land to the wives, and in particular the daughter of the Prophet, Fatima, demanded this land and Abu Bakr refused to give it to her, and she became upset with him till the day she died. And she died 6 months after the death of the Prophet. Ali radiallahu anh buried her at night without telling Abu Bakr. In this particular dispute, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was on the truth, no doubt about that. The evidence is what we have heard. لا نورث ما تركنا فهو صدقة. We are not to be inherited from. Whatever we leave behind is a general charity for the whole of the people. But when you have a heated argument, then people can lose their rational faculty and become too emotional. The narration tells us that Ali felt estrangement from the people, so he sought to reconcile between himself and Abu Bakr. Ali radiallahu anh, the narration mentions, felt that he had a right to the Khilafah because of his relationship with the Prophet, meaning the blood ties with the Prophet. He was the Prophet's son-in-law, but he was also the Prophet's cousin. And he says that he felt that he was not consulted about this matter of the Khilafah. But let there be no doubt that Abu Bakr is, without a doubt, more worthy for the Khilafah, due to many reasons. For example, when the Prophet was ill, he appointed Abu Bakr to lead the Salah. He appointed Abu Bakr to lead the Hajj when the Prophet could not make it because of the delegations visiting him in the 9th year. He appointed Abu Bakr as a second in charge when giving a fatwa when a woman came to him and the Prophet told her to come back, and she said, "But if I do not find you," he said, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدِينِي فَأْتِي أَبَا بَكْرٍ. If you do not find me, go to Abu Bakr to seek the fatwa. Likewise, the Prophet saying that if he had to take a Khalil, then it would have been Abu Bakr. So note, he did not say Ali. Likewise, the Prophet said about the one who's going to be in charge next, يَأْبَى اللَّهُ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِلَّا أَبَا بَكْرٍ. Allah and the mu'minun would refuse everyone except Abu Bakr. Also, he ordered in his illness, إِنَّ أَمَنَّ النَّاسِ عَلَيَّ فِي مَالِي وَصُحْبَتِي أَبُو بَكْرٍ. The one who has given me most bounty or favors with regards to my wealth and my companionship is Abu Bakr. He says, لا يبقى باب في المسجد إلا سد إلا باب أبي بكر. No door in the masjid should be left except that it must be closed or sealed off except the door of Abu Bakr. And this is a strong indication that Abu Bakr is most entitled to be the Khalifa, because he will enter the masjid from the door of his house. This narration in the Sahihain. So these are some of the strong evidences. And then we have an ijma' of the Sahaba that Abu Bakr is the next Khalifa. There may have been a difference in the beginning, but eventually it became an ijma'. Initially, Ali radiallahu anh thought that Abu Bakr is taking the matter into his own hands, having it his own way, without consulting the people fairly. So he felt some grudge. But this long narration ends, firstly, with Ali radiallahu anh wanting a private meeting with Abu Bakr, and in that meeting he acknowledges the fadila, the virtue of Abu Bakr over the rest of the people. And then Ali radiallahu anh gives a public address telling the people why he did not give bay'ah to Abu Bakr initially. and the reason is, as we have just said. But then he publicly announced that he is giving the Pledge of Allegiance to Abu Bakr. And with this explanation of his, the Muslims were pleased. They said, Asabta, you have done the correct thing, because Ali radiallahu anh handled the matter in the correct manner. The narration is clear that Ali gave Pledge of Allegiance, because in Arabic we read Ali radiallahu anh telling Abu Bakr, مَوْعِدُكَ الْعَشِيَّةُ لِلْبَيْعَةِ. This afternoon is fixed for pledging allegiance to you. And also it does make perfect sense why the family members of the Prophet should not take the Khilafah, or at least they should not have most right to take the Khilafah, simply because they are his family members. And the reason is because the people start talking, well, the Prophet is showing favoritism to his family members. He's just doing it so that the political power can remain in his family line. You remember when Herakl asked Abu Sufyan, have there been any kings or rulers in his family line before? And he said no. The reason why Herakl asked this is because maybe this man is pretending to be a prophet so that he can regain this power which his family line once held. The Prophet never showed any nepotism, even when, after the Battle of Badr, when his uncle Al-Abbas was taken in as a prisoner, the people felt, as is reported in Al-Bukhari, that they should let Al-Abbas go because he is a family member of the Prophet. And the Prophet did not allow it. He said, do not even forgive 1 dirham from him. So that is, if he wants his own uncle to be released as a prisoner of war, they're going to have to pay. So you can see no favors being shown to family members when it comes to the rights of Allah Jalla wa Ala. It's also worth mentioning, just referring back to the point of Fatima bint Muhammad radiallahu anha, that in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad it is reported that when Fatima heard the reason why Abu Bakr is refusing to give her the land of Fadak and other wealth is because the Prophets are not to be inherited. When she heard this hadith, it is reported in the Musnad that she said to Abu Bakr, then you know better what you have heard from the Messenger of Allah. And also Al-Hafidh ibn Kathir in his book Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya says that Abu Bakr visited Fatima during the time of her illness, and Fatima felt convinced of the opinion of Abu Bakr because of the hadith. And it's worth mentioning this just in case the listener or the one reading the hadith just in Sahih Muslim feels that there was bad blood between Abu Bakr and Fatima till the day she died. And we say, no, this is not necessarily the case.
Just to pick up a few more points of benefit, with the salab, it is a condition that you must have evidence, and merely a claim that you killed your opponent is not good enough for you to be entitled to his salab. Also, the majority opinion say that the ruling of salab is tashri' and not tanzim. Therefore, you do not need the imam to give you permission. We also learn the fadila of Abu Qatada in that Abu Bakr called him one of the lions of Allah Jalla wa Ala, and the Prophet acknowledged this. Also in the narration of Salama ibn al-Aqwa, the Prophet said, Lahu salabuhu ajma'. He has the whole salab, which means that the salab does not have the 5th taken out of it, because the 5th is taken out from the war booty, and the salab is not part of the main war booty, the ghanima. Also in the narration of the conquest of Banu Fazara, when the Prophet gave that girl in return for the Muslim prisoners who were prisoners in Mecca, it shows us that a woman and her mother can be separated if the daughter is an adult. Because if the daughter or the child is not an adult, then they need their mother and should not be then separated. And we have a stern warning against this separation, that Allah Jalla wa Ala will separate you from your loved ones on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Also with the fate, which is the wealth taken from the enemy without a fight, then this is to be disposed of as the Imam sees fit for the welfare of the people. As for the ghanima, then 1/5 of it is taken out, and where is it spent? Well, Surah Al-Anfal tells us where it is spent. It goes to Allah and the Messenger, and that will be for the welfare of the people. وَلِذِي الْقُرْبَى, and the near kindred of the Prophet, so anyone who is from his lineage. وَالْيَتَامَى, these are the orphans. وَالْمَسَاكِينَ, these are the poor people. وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ, this is the wayfarer. So this is the difference between the khumusul ghanima and the fay, according to the majority of the scholars.
Let us take a look at the next chapter about splitting up or dividing the ghanima between the fighters. From Ibn Umar he says, the Prophet gave 2 shares of extra wealth to horsemen and 1 for the infantry. And so this is how the ghanima is divided up. The cavalrymen obtain 2 because 1 share for the horse, 1 for the man. And then as for the infantryman, he does not have a horse, so he has 1 share. And also, cavalrymen are more useful in a battle than the infantry. Let's take the next chapter about the help of the angels at the Battle of Badr. Let's take the translation of this from Umar ibn al-Khattab. He says, when the Battle of Badr was fought, he says that the mushrikun were about 1,000 and the Muslims were 319. The Prophet turned to the Kaaba, stretched his hands out and began to make dua, saying, Allahumma anjiz li ma wa'adtani. O Allah, accomplish for me what you have promised me. Allahumma ati ma wa'adtani. O Allah, give me what you promised me. Allahumma in tahlik hadhihi al-asabatu min ahli al-Islam la tu'bad fil ard. O Allah, if this band of Muslims is destroyed, then you will not be worshipped on earth. He continued his supplication, stretching out his hands, facing the Qibla, until his mantle slipped from his shoulders. So Abu Bakr came and picked up the mantle and put it on his shoulders. Then he embraced him from behind and said, O Prophet of Allah, this dua of yours to your Rabb, it will suffice you, and he will fulfill for you what he has promised you. And to this Allah Jalla wa Ala revealed the ayah, إِذْ تَسْتَغِيثُونَ رَبَّكُمْ فَاسْتَجَابَ لَكُمْ أَنِّي مُمِدُّكُمْ بِأَلْفٍ مِّنَ الْمَلَائِكَةِ مُرْدِفِينَ. When you appealed to your Rabb for help, and he answered you, saying, I will help you with 1,000 angels coming in succession. Also Ibn Abbas reports, whilst on that day a Muslim was chasing a kafir, he heard a sound saying, أَقْدِمْ حَيْزُومْ, go forward, Hayzum. And he looked to see that this kafir had now fallen on his back, and there was a scar on his nose, and his face was torn as if it had been lashed with a whip, and turned green with its poison. The Prophet was told of this, and the Prophet said, you have told the truth, this was the help from the 3rd heaven. So what he's saying is that this Hayzum was an angel from the 3rd heaven. Ibn Abbas says that the Muslims that day killed 70 people and captured 70. The Prophet asked Abu Bakr and Umar, what is your opinion about these captives? Abu Bakr says, they are our relatives, so you should release them after getting a ransom from them. This will be a source of strength to us, and it is also possible that Allah guides them to Islam. When he asked Umar, Umar says, I do not hold the same opinion as Abu Bakr. Rather, you should hand them over to us, that we may cut off their heads. He said, hand over Aqil to Ali. There were 2 brothers. Aqil did not embrace Islam, Ali did. That Ali may cut off Aqil's head. And hand over such and such a person to such and such a relative of his, so that every person cuts off the head of his own kith and kin. He says, these are the leaders of the kuffar and the veterans amongst them. The Prophet approved of the opinion of Abu Bakr. Umar says, the next day when I came to the Prophet and Abu Bakr, both of them were sitting shedding tears. Umar asked them why. Tell me the reason, because I will also weep, and if not, at least I will pretend to weep. The Prophet says, I weep because of the punishment I saw meted out to these prisoners of war. They were ransomed, just as Abu Bakr advised, and I was shown the torture to which they were subjected. It was brought to me as close as this tree. He pointed to a nearby tree. Allah Jalla wa Ala to this revealed the ayah, مَا كَانَ لِنَبِيٍّ أَن يَكُونَ لَهُ أَسْرَى حَتَّى يُثْخِنَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. It is not for a prophet to have prisoners of war until he has slaughtered much of his enemies in the land. Up until فَكُلُوا مِمَّا غَنِمْتُمْ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا. Then consume of the ghanima that you have earned. It is halal and goodly. So Allah Jalla wa Ala made the ghanima halal for the Muslims. Let's take some points of benefit from this. We take that Allah Jalla wa Ala can send down angels to help the Muslims. In this particular narration, we have an angel with a specific name of Hayzum, and we even know that he is from the 3rd heaven. The malaika, made out of some type of light, are only obedient to Allah Jalla wa Ala, so they are not like humans in this regard. لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم. They do not disobey Allah in what He orders them. وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ. And they do what they are ordered. How many malaika are there? Well, only Allah Jalla wa Ala knows that, but we know they are very many indeed, so we're not just talking about a handful. The Prophet ﷺ said it authentically, أَطَّتِ السَّمَاء وَحُقَّ لَهَا أَن تَئِطَّ. The heavens have groaned, and it is only right that they should groan. ما فيها موضع 4 أصابع إلا وفيها ملك قائم لله أو راكع أو ساجد. There is not a space of 4 fingers in the heavens except that there is an angel either standing before Allah or in ruku' or in sajda. The 7 heavens, how expansive are they? One cannot even begin to imagine. So one can therefore not even begin to imagine the number of malaika. Also we have what is called Al-Baytul Ma'mur, the occupied or inhabited house in the 7th heaven. We are told that every day 70,000 angels enter, never to return, and this will happen up till Yawm al-Qiyamah. That narration is in the Sahihain. The jinn are also from the unseen, but the malaika are more powerful than the jinn, and often what is used to quote as evidence is the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam and the queen or the ruler of Saba. He wanted a throne to be brought, and the Ifrit, the big powerful jinn, said that I can bring it to you before you stand up. قَبْلَ أَن تَقُومَ مِن مَقَامِكَ, before you stand up from your place. But the one who had knowledge of the book said, I could bring it to you before you even blink. And there it was, stood there right before Sulaiman alayhi salam. And it is said that the reason why this person could bring it so quickly is because he had knowledge of the book, which means he had particular knowledge of a dua he made, which enabled an angel to bring the throne to Sulaiman, which is obviously then faster than what the Ifrit could do. The malaika, unlike the humans and jinn, do not need to eat and drink and sleep. They are not that type of creation. The Quraysh were about 1,000. Allah Jalla wa Ala describes them, خرجوا من ديارهم بطرا ورئاء الناس ويصدون عن سبيل الله. They went out of their homes out of pride and showing off to the people and trying to divert others from the path of Allah. The Muslims did not intend to fight at the Battle of Badr. They just went out to take the trade caravans from the mushrikeen, because the mushrikeen expelled the Muslims from their home without any wealth that they could take with them. They just literally left empty-handed from Mecca to Al-Madinah when they emigrated. So the mushrikun were at a war with the Muslimin, and hence their wealth is halal. So that's what the Muslimin were intending, just the trade caravan. They did not make any preparations for the fight, but Allah Jalla wa Ala so willed that they should meet at this appointed hour. This was the 17th of Ramadan, in the 2nd year of the Hijri calendar. This word Badr is so called because the place is named after a well which is named Badr. We find here the Prophet making dua, facing the Kaaba, stretching out his hands as if he's desperate. And so facing the Kaaba and holding out your hands, these are from the mannerisms of making dua. The Prophet ﷺ authentically said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ حَيِّيٌّ كَرِيمٌ يَسْتَحْيِي مِنْ عَبْدِهِ إِذَا رَفَعَ يَدَيْهِ أَنْ يَرُدَّهُمَا صِفْرًا. Allah is shy and kind. He is shy of his servant when his servant raises his hands to him, that Allah should just return these hands back empty. This hadith is in the Sunan. So we have certain cases where we know the Prophet raised hands, such as in this particular occasion at the Battle of Badr. Also, Salat al-Istisqa, making dua for rain. We know he raised his hands such that the whiteness of his armpit could be seen. We know he raised his hands standing at Arafah, because that is the time you make dua. Also standing at As-Safa and Marwa when he climbed up the mountain, he raised his hands making dua. That's also from the Sunnah. So we have particular textual evidence that he raised his hands. And opposite to that are instances where we know he did not raise his hands. For example, in your salah, during your salah, you make dua on many occasions. Surah Al-Fatiha is a dua. And in between the sajda you make dua. After your tashahhud we know you make dua. There are many instances in the salah where you make dua. Your salah is dhikr and dua. But the Prophet did not raise his hands during these moments of dua. There is a difference of opinion as to whether he raised his hands during the qunut of the witr. Some say that he did because Ibn Umar used to do this and he could only have got this from the Prophet. Others say that you do not. Also we know that when the Prophet makes a dua during the khutbah of Yawm al-Jum'ah, he did not raise his hands. At best he pointed upwards with his index finger making the dua. And we can say the same thing about other instances where you make a dua and it is not reported that you raise your hands. For example, entering the lavatory and leaving the lavatory, and many of these other everyday occasions in which a dua is legislated, and you could find these duas in a good dua book. It is not legislated to raise your hands making this dua, because if that had been the case, it would have been narrated to us. So what is apparent to us is that you do not raise your hands on these occasions. However, on other occasions, when you're just generally making a dua, then the asl is, yes, you raise your hands. Let us suppose you're making dua during the last hour of the Yawm al-Jum'ah, when it is hoped that it will be a powerful time to make dua. Yes, you raise your hands. One may also argue that those types of dua where you raise your hands would be those occasions or situations where you feel some desperation and you really want to reach out and make dua, because not every dua is like that. In not every dua you feel a sense of desperation. For example, entering the lavatory or exiting the lavatory. It is not a desperation type of situation. Whereas if you compare that to the Battle of Badr, of course, the Battle of Badr is a desperate situation. Like the Prophet said, if this group of Ahlul Islam are to be destroyed, you will not be worshipped on earth. Now you cannot get more desperate than that. We find that in a dua you can repeat what you're asking for, because the Prophet says, Anjizli, and then he says, Atini, what you have promised me. So Anjizli and Atini, they mean pretty much the same thing. Give me what you have promised me. Meaning to say, victory against the mushrikeen. And you can make tawassul in your dua by making mention of your desperate situation that you find yourself in. Because the Prophet said, if this band of Ahlul Islam are destroyed, you will not be worshipped. So that is to say, we are in a desperate situation, a critical situation. Musa a.s. said to Allah Jalla wa Ala, Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khayrin faqir. Rabbi, I am in need of whatever good you can send down to me. Again, he's making mention of his desperate situation. If a person comes and asks you to give him £100, you might just ignore him. But then if he mentions to you that he has wife and children and they are dying out of hunger and he has no way to support them and the situation has reached a critical level for him, then you may well just change your mind. Why is this? Because he's asking you, making mention of his critical situation. And so making mention of your desperate situation makes you humble and lowers you before Allah Jalla wa Ala. And this is what Allah wants, for you to humble and lower yourself before Him. Also we have the dua that the Prophet taught Abu Bakr to say in his salah, which begins, Allahumma inni zalamtu nafsi zulman kathira. Oh Allah, I have wronged myself much. Again, you're making tawassul, making mention of your desperate situation. It is also possible to make tawassul to Allah Jalla wa Ala, that is to say, take a wasila, a way to gain a nearness to Allah Jalla wa Ala by making mention of some of the descriptions of Allah. For example, in the dua of the Salatul Istikhara, you say, Allahumma inni astakhiruka bi'ilmik wa astaqdiruka biqudratik. Oh Allah, I seek a decision with your knowledge and I seek power with your power or ability. So this description, the sifa of knowledge and qudra, ability, these are from the sifat of Allah Jalla wa Ala, and you're using these sifat as a means of gaining a nearness to Allah Jalla wa Ala. So using the names and attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala is an effective way to seek nearness or a tawassul to Allah Jalla wa Ala. Also you can make tawassul using your righteous actions. There's many evidences for this. For example, in Surah Al-Imran, رَبَّنَا إِنَّنَا سَمِعْنَا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا. So they're saying, we have heard the caller telling us to have Iman, and so we have accepted or embraced Iman, so forgive our sins. That is, because of our Iman, forgive our sins. You're making tawassul using your righteous actions, and Iman is the most righteous of all actions. We also have the narration in Sahih al-Bukhari about the 3 people who were blocked off in a cave by a stone, and one made tawassul by his birr, his complete good treatment to his parents. The other one made tawassul by his iffa, his chastity, and the other one made tawassul by his amana, his trust. Birr, iffa, wal amana. 3 people, 3 different tawassul being made. Okay, what about making tawassul by asking a righteous person to make dua for you? Well, many ulama have allowed this, and the people would ask the Prophet ﷺ to make dua. After the Prophet, Umar says that they used his uncle Al-Abbas to make dua for rain. Note here, they did not use the Prophet to make dua because the Prophet was dead, and dead people cannot make dua. Remember, their actions are cut off except for those three. And in particular, it is shirk to make tawassul using the honor of the Prophet. It is shirk asghar. The honor of the Prophet only benefits the Prophet, it does not benefit you. Everything which you make into a sabab, a cause, which is not actually a sabab in the Sharia, nor in the physical world, then it is shirk. This is the guiding principle about what shirk is. So here a person is making the honor of the Prophet as a sabab for his dua to be answered? No, there is no evidence for this in the Sharia, neither in the materialistic, scientific realm. So therefore it is shirk. Similar to, for example, wearing amulets to ward off some sort of harm or the evil eye and so on. There is no basis for this in the Sharia, and there is no basis for this in the materialistic, scientific realm, such that it could be experimented with and proven to be the case in laboratories and so on. So it is not a sabab in the Shar'i sense, nor in the hissi or the physical sense. Hence it is shirk by definition. This is the way you tell whether something is a shirk or not. We take from the narration the high status and ranking of Abu Bakr and Umar. Why? Because the Prophet is asking them, what should we do with the prisoners? Now you're not going to ask just any old person about affairs like these. You have to ask the best company that you have. Abu Bakr mentions that they are our qaraba, they are our near kindred, from the same tribe as us. Secondly, he says, ransom them, because with this wealth we could become yet more powerful against the kuffar. And the third point he mentions is that if they become free, they could see the gentleness of the Muslims, and maybe that will encourage them to embrace Islam. Umar, of course, had a vastly different opinion. He says each person should take his family member from the prisoners of war and strike their neck. These are the leaders of the kuffar and the Quraysh, and if they are killed, especially by their own family members, then it will be a great psychological victory for the Muslims. And so we take from this that even if someone is more virtuous than you, you can differ with him, as Umar differed with Abu Bakr, where Abu Bakr is more virtuous than Umar. But if you feel strongly that the truth is on your side, then who is more virtuous and less virtuous is irrelevant. Rather, the truth must prevail. The Prophet opted for Abu Bakr's opinion, as we are told. But when the ayah came down, when the Prophet and Abu Bakr were both crying because of the punishment they saw that was going to be meted out to these prisoners of war, the ayah, مَا كَانَ لِنَبِيٍّ أَن يَكُونَ لَهُ أَسْرَى حَتَّى يُثْخِنَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. The Prophet must first strike fear into the hearts of the kuffar, so that they respect him and venerate him. Only then must he take prisoners of war. This ayah is telling us that Umar was correct, and that the choice the Prophet made, which was to take Abu Bakr's opinion, was the wrong choice. Of course, they're humans, they can make wrong choices once in a while. It does not mean they're punishment worthy. So we can take that even if people do not accept your opinion and overlook it and ignore it, perhaps argue against it, it does not mean that you are wrong. Let's move to the next chapter about binding prisoners and putting them in the confinement and setting them free without ransom. This is a lengthy narration. Let's take the translation. Abu Hurairah says, the Prophet sent some horsemen to Najd. They captured a man from the tribe of Banu Hanifa called Thumama ibn Uthal. He was the chief of the people of Yamama. He was tied to a pillar in the masjid. The Prophet came to Thumama and asked him, O Thumama, what do you think? He replied, O Muhammad, I have a good opinion of you. If you kill me, you will kill a person.
You would be killing a man whose blood is expensive. And the reason he said that is because he was the chief of one of the largest tribes in Arabia, Banu Hanifa. They were one of the giants. And so killing a man like him is bound to bring on retaliation.
But if you do me a favor, you will do a favor to a person who is grateful. And if you want wealth, ask me, and you will receive what you demand. The Prophet left him in this condition for 2 days and then returned, asked him the same question, and received the same reply. Again the Prophet left him for a day and then came back to him, and asked him the same question, and received the same reply. To that the Prophet ordered that Thumama be set free. Thumama went to a palm grove near the masjid and took a bath, and he came back into the masjid, and took the Shahada. And he said, By Allah, there was no face on the earth more hateful to me than yours, but now your face has become the dearest to me. And by Allah, there was no religion more hateful to me than your religion, but now it has become the dearest religion to me. And by Allah, there was no city more hateful than your city, but now it has become the dearest of cities to me. He says, Your horsemen captured me whilst I was intending to go for Umrah. So what is your opinion? And the Prophet gave him glad tidings to go and complete the Umrah. When he went to Mecca, somebody asked him, Have you changed your religion? And he said, No, I have embraced Islam. And he said, You will not receive a single grain of wheat from Yamama until the Prophet permits it. We take from the narration that you can capture the leaders and take them in as prisoners. There's no problem with that because they are kuffar. Also, tying a kafir to a pillar of the masjid is permitted. The najasa of the mushrik is not a physical najasa, so they are allowed to enter the masjid. Can a kafir enter the masjid? Well, if this entry is for the benefit of the masjid, such as a builder or a painter or a decorator or an electrician and so on, then this is fine. Likewise, if the benefit of entering the masjid is for his personal benefit, and we do not fear that he will attack us or do anything of that nature, some sort of treachery, then that's fine, he's allowed to enter. Thumama ibn Uthal gave an eloquent and elaborate reply to the Prophet's question, How do you find yourself? He says, If you're going to kill me, you will kill the one who has blood, so one who is worthy to be killed. But if you do a favor to me, then you're doing a favor to a person who is grateful. That is, if you set me free, I will be grateful. And if you want wealth, then ask, you will have whatever you want.
And we find that the Prophet, from his noble and kind character, set him free without a ransom. We'll continue with this story in the next track. However, at this point, let's just stop and take a few more points of benefit. We previously said that the infantryman has 1 share and the cavalrymen have 2 shares, from the ghanima, of course, as a ratio, after taking out the 5th, and also after taking out any anfal, any extras that you give on account of bravery. Then after all of that, the ratio is 2-to-1, cavalry to infantry. However, we have a problem nowadays. First of all, not many people fight on horseback. Nowadays you have fighter jets, tanks, and so on. And we have no text regarding these matters. The tanks and the fighter jets also are not possessions of the soldier. They are possessions of the state, as opposed to horses, which were possession of the individual soldier. So there's a major difference. Another difference is that soldiers nowadays are paid by the government. In the times of the Prophet ﷺ, there was no such a system. So the soldiers would be paid via the war booty. But today the system is completely different. So bearing these differences in mind, people who research this area, they say that the best we can say is that the war booty is divided in accordance with the ijtihad of the ruler. And we'll just leave it at that. Okay, let's take some review questions at this stage. So question number 1. Explain what the salab is, then explain what the majority opinion is as to whether this ruling is a tashri' or a tanzim. Question number 2. State at least 3 ways in which one may make at-tawassul in their dua. Question number 3. Explain how the war booty was divided during the time of the Prophet, then explain what the problems are with this division nowadays.